Good morning, it's Friday the 15th of May and you're watching Daybreak live here on AnewZ. I'm your host Nadia, Gyane, here to take you through the day's top stories, so let's take a look at the headlines. Donald Trump meets Xi Jinping for a final round of talks as the US president wraps up his state visit to Beijing. Ukraine is hit by a second day of large-scale Russian missile and drone strikes. And clashes erupt as mining groups stage anti-government protests in Bolivia. First this morning, Donald Trump is continuing his summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing on the second day of his state visit to China. In the last hour, he's met the leader at the compound for the Chinese Communist Party, Nadia. Now let's go to the report for more on this story.
US President Donald Trump arrived at Beijing's Zhongnanhai Leadership Compound on Friday for more talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the second and final day of his state visit to China. The leaders are holding meetings and a working lunch as Washington seeks Chinese support on trade and the conflict involving Iran. At Thursday's state banquet, Xi warned against damaging relations between the world's two largest economies.
We agreed that China-US relations are the most important bilateral relationship in the world today. They can only be handled well and must not be messed up. When the two countries cooperate, both benefit. When they fight, both suffer. They should be partners, not adversaries. We agree to build a constructive and strategically stable China-US relationship, promote the stable, healthy, and sustainable development of bilateral ties, and bring more peace, prosperity, and progress to the world.
Trump later said he hoped ties with Beijing would become stronger and better than ever before, while the two sides discussed trade deals and the future of the Taiwan issue. Beijing warned that mishandling Taiwan could seriously damage relations. The shadow of the war in the Middle East also looms over the summit. Following reports of a ship seizure in the Gulf, Trump told reporters that his patience with Tehran is ending.
We did discuss Iran. We feel very similar to Iran. We want that to end. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. We want the straits open. We're closing it now. I mean, they closed it, and we closed it on top of them. But we want the straits open, and we want them to get it ended because it's a crazy thing. They're a little bit crazy. When it's no good, can't have it. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
While the US and China have agreed on the need to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, Iran's leadership has hit back at the BRICS summit in India, dismissing any military solution to the standoff.
While ready to fight with everything we have in defense of our freedom and our soil, we are equally ready to pursue and defend diplomacy. As I have repeatedly stated, there is no such thing as a military solution to anything related to Iran. We Iranians never bow to any pressure or threat, but we reciprocate the language of respect.
On the economic front, the summit has already yielded tangible results aimed at maintaining a fragile trade truce. Agreements have been firmed up for significant Chinese purchases of American farm goods, beef and Boeing aircraft, with both sides working to identify $30 billion of non-sensitive goods for future trade. As the two leaders wrap up their meetings today, the focus remains on whether Washington will extend the current suspension of tariffs beyond the end of the year.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we go first to CNN's website with the clear story for the day, and it's US-China summit. Xi hosts Trump at the Communist Party's leadership compound. So we know that they met earlier this morning at this particular compound in Beijing. Now, just to let you know that only a handful of American leaders have ever stepped into the highly guarded headquarters, about which little is publicly revealed. The last US president to see the Zongnahai was Barack Obama back in 2014, I believe. So the US President Donald Trump's visit to China will actually conclude later today, but not before finishing off the summit with a few more events that's scheduled throughout the day. So here's what's on the schedule for Trump's last day, and I think we can play the pictures that has been circulating throughout the day already. So at 8 o'clock local time, there was an executive time of which which was close to the press that Trump had. Then at 10:55, which is just roughly an hour or so ago, Trump and Xi took a photo together in the Zongnahai garden, and then later they met for bilateral tea together. Now at 11:40 later local time, the two leaders are scheduled to continue their meeting over lunch, as we can see some newspapers here of the two leaders meeting. And then after lunch, they wrap things up, and Trump will then leave China and head back to the US. Now later on in the program, we will have some more information about how this meeting has gone, as well as having an global in-studio guest to really dig into how this meeting has gone and what the two sides have actually gained from it. Okay, now these are some extra pictures. So just Trump and Xi sharing pleasantries in different places within Beijing. Okay, now let's go to our next story this morning, and that's in relation to Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, because on the Deutsche Welle's website, it's saying that Iran Chinese ships passed through the Hormuz overnight. Now, Iran's Revolutionary Guard said on Thursday that a number of Chinese ships were allowed passage through the strategic Strait of Hormuz since the night before. Now, Iranian state TV said that more than 30 ships had been allowed to pass through the strait, but did not specify how many of those ships were Chinese. Now, we know that Chinese and Iran have a very close relationship, which is also another reason that it's on the agenda for Trump and Xi Jinping later today in relation to what can be done in opening up the strait and hopefully bringing an end to the war, which we'll get in a little bit later on in the program. Now, what Iran's Revolutionary Guard said is that it was ultimately concluded that a number of Chinese ships requested by this country would pass through the strait after an agreement on Iran's management protocols, the Guard said in a statement, adding that this passage began last night. Now, an IRGC commander stressed vessels linked to an enemy state continue to be blocked from passing through the waterway. The semi-official Fars news agency reported. As well as that, the statement coincided with President Trump's visit, as I mentioned, where rallying support against Iran is among its top priorities. In his comments to a US broadcaster, Fox News, Trump said that after meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping, said that the leader had promised to help him with opening up the Strait of Hormuz and vowed not to arm Iran with any weapons. Meanwhile, Washington has claimed that its blockade of Iranian ports is a response to Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Right, let's go to our next story this morning, and that is in regards to Cuba, and that's on Al Jazeera's website. Absolutely no fuel is the headline. Cuba hit by blackouts, protests and power outages. Now, Cuba says it will entertain a US offer. The US has now offered it $100 million in humanitarian aid due to what's going on here. But we have to also remind you that the US has stopped oil flow to the country because it's not happy with its regime. Venezuela was its biggest importer of oil, but since the US government went and actually captured Nicolas Maduro earlier this year, that has stopped. Mexico has tried, as well as other Caribbean countries, to get oil over to Cuba, but that has subsequently not been enough. Now, this particular offer of $100 million in humanitarian aid has been expressed with some form of skepticism over President Donald Trump's intentions at a time when the US has blocked the island from receiving oil and its key resources. Now, the Cuban Foreign Minister, Bruno Rodriguez, said the island's communist-run government was willing to consider the offer, but said no strings should be attached to it. Now, last week, US State Department said it had privately offered the $100 million in aid to Cuba on the condition that the island government agree to meaningful reforms, whatever that means. We don't have much further information in regards to that. However, Rodriguez denied that Trump administration had made any such offer, calling it a fable, a lie. The Trump administration then repeated the offer again in a statement on Wednesday. Now, the living conditions in Cuba have dramatically worsened, and as this particular article mentioned, there has been protests, blackouts throughout the city because of a lack of fuel. Now, Trump in January threatened tariffs on any nation supplying the island with fuel. Top of the allies was Mexico and Venezuela, and has since cut off oil shipments to Cuba because of the US threatening them with high tariffs, which has now led to dire shortages of fuel and electricity. But we'll keep you updated with how this goes, whether or not they accept the US offer of humanitarian aid in $100 million, or whether or not they decide something else. But Cuba is very worrisome as to what this $100 million comes with and what they might need to change in relation to government reform. Okay, now let's go to our next headline this morning, and that's on the BBC. And that's quite an interesting story, only because what's going on in New York right now. The title reads, the headline is "Hundreds of Illegal Motorbikes Bulldozed in New York City. Crime Crackdown." Now, the New York Police Department bulldozed more than 200 scooters. We're just going to play that video. It's quite striking that they decided to film these 200 scooters that they've collected. So it's 200 scooters, mopeds and motorbikes in Staten Island on Tuesday. It's part of the city's crackdown. So this is just giving a speech there, and here we are. That is incredible. There we are. It's part of the city's crackdown on illegal and unregistered bikes. Now, the NPD, the New York Police Department, said over 5,000 dangerous illegal vehicles had been seized so far since the start of the year. It's a 10% increase compared to the same period in 2025 last year, and comes after a 7-month-old child was killed by a stray bullet in a drive-by shooting in the Brooklyn area on the 1st of April, where the suspects fled the scene on an illegal moped. So it's the reason why this particular, what you're watching on screen right now, why they've decided to crush all these mopeds. And it's actually to show those using them that it's something that they are not going to tolerate, especially when it comes to crime. Okay, well, that's the press roundup for this morning. Thank you for seeing all of that. Please continue to stay with me, because we're going to go for a quick break, and when I return, I'll have the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories. We turn to Japan, who says it's watching very closely high-level talks between the United States and China as both sides conclude a 2-day state visit. Speaking on Friday, Japanese spokesperson said Tokyo is following the meeting with great interest. Here's what he had to say.
We believe it is important for US-China relations to contribute to the stability of the international community, including Japan, and the government is monitoring the situation with great interest. We intend to gather information on today's exchanges between the United States and China, including their potential impact on Japan, and respond appropriately. We believe that based on our strong relationship of trust with our ally, the United States, it is important to continue urging China to fulfill the responsibilities appropriate to its position.
Now turning to Iran, and Iran's Revolutionary Guard says more than 30 vessels, including Chinese flagged ships, crossed the Strait of Hormuz overnight. The statement comes as US President Donald Trump pushes Beijing to increase pressure on Tehran during his state visit to China. But in an interview to Fox News, Donald Trump said the Chinese leader had committed to withholding military equipment from Iran, and that Xi had offered to help when it comes to making a deal to open the Strait of Hormuz. Iran denies fully blocking the strait, but shipping companies are required to coordinate crossings with Iranian authorities. Staying in the Middle East, US-mediated talks between Israel and Lebanon are set to continue in Washington, as Israel also outlines its wider regional strategy, and a new Gaza-bound flotilla leaves Turkey.
US-mediated talks between Israel and Lebanon are continuing in Washington, with both sides trying to move towards a halt in fighting after weeks of cross-border escalation. A US State Department official described Thursday's talks as productive and positive, with further discussions set to continue on Friday. Lebanon is seeking a ceasefire that Israel implements, while an Israeli government spokesperson said the talks are aimed at disarming Hezbollah and reaching a peace agreement. The Washington meetings mark the highest-level contact between Lebanon and Israel in decades, and come as a fragile ceasefire is due to expire on Sunday. Israel is also presenting its wider military operations across the region as part of a broader security strategy. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would keep acting against threats while seeking cooperation with what he called moderate actors in the Middle East.
The determination to strike those who seek our lives deep within their territory, far from our borders, the buffer zones we have created around us, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, all these have changed the face of the Middle East. We will continue to fight forcefully against every threat of radical Islam. At the same time, we will expand cooperation with moderate actors in our region who have understood the advantages of extending a hand to Israel.
Meanwhile, dozens of boats from the global Samud flotilla have departed from Marmaris in Turkey, carrying aid supplies and international activists. The flotilla is trying to reach Gaza by sea in a renewed challenge to Israel's blockade.
I would say that it's important for flotillas to continue because it holds hope, it brings a community together, and it gives visibility. It's like we might not reach, but every time something happens, like the interception, for example, it creates new awareness to new audiences.
The voyage follows an earlier attempt by the same group, which was intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters last month after setting off from Spain. More than 100 pro-Palestinian activists were taken to Crete, while 2 others were taken to Israel after being arrested.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing mounting pressure inside the Labour Party after Health Secretary Wes Streeting resigned. Starmer later replaced Streeting with James Murray. Here's more on that report.
Will this budget save Starmer?
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has appointed James Murray as Britain's new health minister after the resignation of Wes Streeting added to growing pressure on the Labour government. Lucy Rigby was also named Chief Secretary to the Treasury, replacing Murray in the Finance Ministry. Streeting stepped down on Thursday, saying he had lost confidence in Starmer's leadership following heavy Labour losses in recent local elections. In his resignation letter, he said the party needed a wider debate about its future leadership and direction. Starmer responded by thanking Streeting for his work in government and said Labour must continue delivering on its promises after returning to power in 2024. The political uncertainty deepened further after Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham announced plans to seek a return to Parliament through a by-election expected to follow the resignation of Labour lawmaker Josh Simons. The developments have intensified scrutiny over Starmer's leadership as Labour attempts to recover from its recent election setbacks.
Over to the war in Ukraine, and rescuers are searching for dozens of missing people after Russian missiles destroyed part of a residential building in Kyiv. Ukraine says the country faced one of its largest aerial attacks since the war began.
Search and rescue operations are continuing in Kyiv's Darnitsky district after a Russian strike caused part of a residential building to collapse. Ukrainian officials say at least 27 civilians were killed across the country over 2 days of attacks, while dozens remain missing in the capital. Ukraine says Russia launched more than 1,500 drones alongside dozens of missiles in what officials described as one of the war's largest aerial assaults. President Volodymyr Zelensky said preliminary investigations showed a recently manufactured Russian Kh-101 missile struck the Kyiv apartment block.
We are investigating in detail exactly which weapons, missiles and drones the Russians used this time. According to preliminary data, a Kh-101 missile struck a building in Kyiv. It was manufactured in the second quarter of this year, which means that Russia is continuing to import the components for missile production, the necessary resources and equipment in circumvention of global sanctions. This must be a real priority for all our partners, to stop Russia's schemes to circumvent sanctions.
Meanwhile, the United Nations says one of its humanitarian convoys came under drone attack while delivering aid in the southern city of Kherson.
As usual, we plan carefully our missions. We are very concerned about security given the constant conflict. We have notified the military, both the Ukrainian and the Russian side. But unfortunately, immediately after passing the bridge, entering Austria, a drone hit one of our cars. Luckily, nobody was hurt. We could go to the place where we were supposed to go, deliver the assistance, and then while we were doing that, a second drone attack, again, one of our cars.
The aid convoy later completed its mission before being evacuated by local authorities. No injuries among UN staff were reported.
Now over to Latvia, and Latvian Prime Minister Ivica Salina has announced her resignation on Thursday after her coalition government collapsed months before October's general election. Salina lost her parliamentary majority after the Progressives Party withdrew support over the dismissal of Defence Minister following incidents involving stray Ukrainian drones entering Latvian airspace. 2 drones crashed in eastern Latvia. No deaths or injuries were reported, but the incident sparked criticism of the country's official response. President Edgars Rinovich is expected to begin consultations on forming a new government on Friday. Now, for the first time since 2018, none of the South Caucasus countries will appear in the Eurovision Grand Final after both Azerbaijan and Armenia failed to qualify in Thursday's semi-final. Following Georgia's earlier elimination, here's Katie Wilson with this report.
Well, it wasn't a good night for South Caucasus countries at Eurovision this year. We've just had the results from the second semi-final, and both Azerbaijan and Armenia have been eliminated. Now, remembering that Georgia was eliminated on Tuesday, this marks the first time since 2018 that all 3 South Caucasus countries won't be appearing in the final. Now, if we took a look at the predictions for this semi-final, on some level, this wasn't a surprise. Juve was performing in the second slot, which is typically an unlucky slot when it comes to qualification at Eurovision. But it was better news for 10 other countries. The qualifiers this evening were Bulgaria, Ukraine, Norway, Australia, Romania, Malta, Cyprus, Albania, Denmark and Czechia. On some levels, not a lot of surprises there, but we'll be seeing those alongside the qualifiers from Tuesday night and the big 4 countries and the host Austria in Saturday's grand finals.
I would say we're here, we're doing it, we're doing it, that's it, we're living the dream. No matter what happens on Saturday night, I can say I've lived my dream, so I'm really happy.
Has it sunk in yet?
It has, yeah, and I feel lucky because it's sunk in and I'm really getting to appreciate it. And I can't say, like, now I'll look back and know in these moments, like, okay, I took it in. I know I'm going to want to do it all over again, but then we'll be on to the next thing.
All eyes will be on Saturday's final, so not a good night for the South Caucasus, as I say, but a very good night for one young lady from Cyprus. Take a look at that in our next report coming up.
A shame for Azerbaijan, but we keep pressing forward. Hopefully in 2027 we can make it to the grand finale. Okay, let's now move over to the US, and it's announced a $1.8 billion in new humanitarian funding for the United Nations, adding to a $2 billion pledge made in December. Washington said the aid would go mainly to countries that match President Donald Trump's foreign policy priorities, including Lebanon and Venezuela. The UN said it will continue to follow principles of neutrality as global humanitarian needs rise and funding falls. Now over to Europe, and explosions in the streets of Bolivia's administrative capital, La Paz. The country is now facing a wave of unrest that has turned economic frustration into open confrontation. Here's more on that story.
Violent unrest erupted in Bolivia's capital, La Paz, on Thursday as police clashed with mining groups demanding the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz. Demonstrators faced off with police in an attempt to force their way into Plaza Murillo, the political heart of the city, as sticks of dynamite were reportedly thrown during clashes with security forces. The protests come as Bolivia faces a worsening economic and fuel crisis, with miners, farmers, and union-backed groups blaming shortages of fuel and US dollars for crippling livelihoods. Demonstrators are demanding easier access to diesel and explosives, alongside changes to mining contracts and regulations. In response, government officials have accused opposition figures and former President Evo Morales of fueling the unrest. Evo Morales, who is warning the unrest would continue unless rising prices, fuel shortages, and inflation are addressed.
These leaders, who serve former President Evo Morales' political interests, agreed not to engage in dialogue and continue telling Bolivians that the only way out is to break democracy, to overthrow a president elected by popular vote who was legitimately elected and has been in office for only 6 months. Whose interests do they serve? What financing is behind this? What is the alternative? To return to the same model they used for 245 months, and that failed.
The government says it remains willing to negotiate, with authorities already holding talks with protest leaders over fuel subsidies, welfare support, and land reform legislation. Shortly before the clashes erupted, around 20 mining representatives entered the presidential palace for emergency discussions with ministers and the president himself. Still, some protesters openly called for the president to step down, warning that if he refused to resign voluntarily, they would force him out through mass unrest.
We do not want dialogue or anything. We only want the resignation of the president no matter what. He leaves the good way, or he leaves with social upheaval.
Bolivia is at a critical moment. The national spirit is wounded, the democratic heart is grieved, and the institutional soul is in deep anguish as a result of what we are experiencing.
Meanwhile, roadblocks set up by protesters have caused severe disruption nationwide. Thousands of lorries have reportedly been stranded on major highways, leading to shortages of food, medical supplies, and oxygen deliveries for hospitals. What began as peaceful demonstrations has now erupted into violent unrest, reflecting mounting anger over Bolivia's economic crisis.
Now, 5 Italian divers have died in a scuba diving accident in the Maldives after they failed to resurface during a cave dive. The divers are believed to have been exploring caves at a depth of around 50 meters. One body was found inside a cave about 60 meters underwater, while the other 4 are believed to be in the same area. Specifically equipped divers have been sent in, but authorities say the search is extremely risky. The victims include a marine biology professor, her daughter, and 2 young researchers from the University of Genoa. Now, scientists say that the volcano in Hawaii, volcano Kailua, was showing heightened activity and could enter a new eruptive phase within hours. One of the volcano's active cracks in its surface resumed throwing out molten lava after a short pause earlier this week. Recent eruptions have sent lava fountains more than 300 meters into the air. The current eruptive cycle began in December 2024. Now, from seaside adventures to international premieres, anime film is once again turning Baku into a colourful hub of creativity and storytelling. This year's festival brings together filmmakers, young audiences and animation lovers from around the world for a celebration inspired by the sea. Our AnewZ journalist Nadia Gyane has more.
A festival as colorful and lively as the sweetest childhood memory. This is the feeling the Anima Film Festival gives its guests regardless of age as they gather for its 9th edition. It is a celebration that promotes creativity through animated cinema and unites children, young people, animation directors and studios, introducing them to international experience. At the opening ceremony, guests watched the premieres of the children's animated series Easy and Pity and the short animated film Porridge Monster. The hall is buzzing, everyone excited to see the animation for the first time. I'm also finding my place because Easy and Pity is about to steal the show.
I really like this animation because in every episode, Issy visited a new region. In each episode, he called and talked with his grandmother and grandfather. I especially like the Sheki episode because I've been to Sheki myself.
This year, the festival's geography expanded even further with the official competition program featuring 31 films from 20 different countries. The selected films stand out for their visual richness and innovative animation techniques.
The narrative is the most important thing in the animation that we're choosing to qualify for the prize. So yeah, the visuals, the narrative is really important, and I'd say the author's overall eagerness to see their project come alive. It's really important, the energy and the vibe of them.
Each festival edition is dedicated to a new theme. This year, Anima Film invites participants on a sea journey, choosing a sea dog as its main motive. Zulfugar, a biodiversity expert who advised the Anima Film team on sea dogs, explained why marine biodiversity matters.
Caspian seal is the only mammal found in the Caspian Sea, and it's heavily endangered according to some numbers. There might be some academic work about the animals, about the nature, about the biodiversity, but obviously the children are not going to read the academic papers, so there have to be some way of science communication between the academics and the children and in general the population. And I think animations, books or any kind of like a integration between the knowledge and the people is an important aspect of bringing it together.
During the festival, we also attended an international pitching competition where animators from nearly 20 countries presented their projects to the jury. Entries from countries such as Egypt, Venezuela and Morocco focused on the cultural and social issues within their communities while targeting a broader audience. The festival continues with screening hundreds of animated films and hosting masterclasses, conferences, performances and exhibitions.
Very creative with some really lovely characters. Now we're going to take a short break. When I return, I'll have a global talk and guest to focus on a number of the key stories as well as the regional headlines. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to our top story, and US President Donald Trump has met with Xi Jinping for a final round of talks as he wraps up his state visit to Beijing. Now Trump and Xi had committed to withholding military equipment from Iran. In an interview with Fox News, Trump said that China wants the Strait of Hormuz open again. Joining me now to discuss this in further detail is Chingiz Mammadov, research alumni at the NED and Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Welcome this morning.
Good morning, Nadia. Very nice to be with you.
Good to have you on the program. Well, the world has been watching what's been going on between these two very powerful leaders. Trump has made his state visit to China this week. And what's interesting is how the two have related to one another. Trump has been very pleasant and used very flattering words, saying that he's a great leader. He's happy that he's honored to be his friend. And China has also said that it's important for their relationship, their partnership to continue and grow. However, I want to bring your attention to one thing that the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said, and that's on the Iran war. They said that the war should never have happened and has no need to continue. This is, which is really interesting because the US has decided to take strong military action against Iran. What's your view on what this Chinese spokesperson has said and what the US goal is when it comes to Iran?
This is a very remarkable statement because political culture in the United States and China are different. And actually structures of countries are different. United States is a democratic country in which there is political competition, and that's why there is a need always to explain steps to be more public. Chinese is more kind of silent. They prefer silent diplomacy, and that's why statements like this demonstrate that this was very important to make this statement. And I think this signals that China has upper hand in these negotiations. Trump likes, to use terms, having cards. So I think this time China has more cards in their hands than the United States. And that's why I think this statement from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China appeared, because it demonstrates that United States has limits in its pressure to Iran. So it signals that China considers this situation kind of not normal. And China, of course, is interested in the Strait of Hormuz because according to different numbers, but about 80% of Iranian oil, 80%, is bought by China. So one may think that, this is very crucial for China. No, this is important, but not crucial. Which means that, yes, China is interested in opening Strait of Hormuz, but not to the extent to weaken Iran to the point in which United States will have control of this area. So China is more interested in getting Strait of Hormuz open, but at the same time with guarantees that the United States will not escalate and will not re-attack Iran again. So that's why I'm saying that the United States has, China has upper hands in these discussions. And I think this statement from both countries, from both leaders, that they want to open the Strait of Hormuz, it will most likely, it will happen, because Iran is also desperately needs the strait to be open for simple social economic reasons within Iran. Iran depends on revenues to keep the population happy.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, that's main reason. And I think kind of I explained it already.
Yeah, no, and that's a key point, as you mentioned, that it's not necessarily crucial, but important for China to make sure the Strait of Hormuz is open and that the US doesn't get control over Iran, because it sees Iran as a key partner in relation to, diplomacy and what it gets from it, the key oil route. Now, Trump spoke to Fox News on Thursday and said that Xi has actually offered to strike a deal with Iran. Whether or not that's true, that's still to be confirmed from Iran. And he said he also thinks that Xi agrees that Iran should not have nuclear weapons. What are your thoughts to that? And do you think that China could help in ending the war with the US in Iran?
I could add also the interview given by the State Secretary Mark Rubio on the plane, and he also said that they rely on China to resolve this crisis with Iran, which again demonstrates that the United States depends on China. China wants Iran to be weakened to the point that they kind of open Strait of Hormuz, but they don't want Iran to also, let's say, endanger the Gulf overall. So that's why not having a nuclear Iran is also in China's interest, because otherwise the entire Gulf will be in danger, and the events may take another route. So that's why I think China is interested in negotiating with Iran, pressuring Iran to the point that they will open the Strait of Hormuz. Also, to some extent, to diminish the nuclear ambitions, but at the same time, request and expect from the United States guarantees that Iran and its current, regime will stay intact. Why? Because Iran also is important for China as a strategic geographical point, because otherwise the United States, which control all Arab states in Gulf, if they control also Iran, they will acquire too much power, and it's not in the China's interest. So that's why I think China will help, but in these negotiations, I think United States depends on China more than China and the United States.
Yeah.
Plus, we should take into account that it's not only about Iran, but these negotiations is also about trade, about technology, about Taiwan. And another statement, she openly stated that, if United States continue this path, so it may create also conflict over Taiwan.
Which I'll get to, yes,
Okay,
because
good.
that's a very key point. But just on the topic of trade, it's quite interesting in relation to that, because Trump has taken with him some of his key tech bosses, which includes Elon Musk, it includes the Nvidia boss, as well as Apple CEO Tim Cook. But what is the US strategy when it comes to China? What is the US hoping to get out of these meetings with Xi Jinping? Apart, if we just put Iran to one side, just in regards to the US, what is the main point of these talks that Trump is having with Xi?
Good question, Nadia. First of all, there is rivalry between China and the United States, and it's very fierce. It's, kind of calm. It's not going to the conflict, not open war, but at the same time, it's very strong rivalry. Let's put some numbers to our discussion to the table, and also some observations. First number, China has now 600 million active AI users. 600. 93% of rare earth minerals are produced by China, and the United States urgently needs these rare earth materials. Plus, United States tries to impose sanctions on China. Trump, after coming to power, he promised 150%, then reduced to 50%, and then it ended up only with 10%. Why? Because economies of China and the United States are intertwined. Unlike of Cold War, when Soviet Union and the United States competed, but they were not connected, not work together. But this time it's inside each other. United States cannot punish China without shooting itself on their own leg, and that's why now again why I'm saying that China has upper hand, because United States needs China, but China needs US as well. Why? Because right now, still, technological advance is with the United States. They are developing chips. They are produced mainly in Taiwan. They are produced partly in US and in China, but development, mind is still in the United States. That's why China needs this. But in turn, the United States needs Chinese big market, technological market. That's why they have taken with them. But there is one more important factor, and this is crucial in competition between China and the United States. And this is actually a very simple economic factor, but this factor is defining the development of humanity overall. And this is very simple: cost of labor. Despite all Trump attempts to bring American companies back to the United States, it's failed. It's a futile attempt, because capital investments will flow where the cost of labor is lower. And the difference between cost of labor in the United States and in China is not by percentage time, it's in several times. And that's why China has upper hand. They know that, but they know that they should avoid conflict. They don't want to go into conflict right now over Taiwan, but they warned the United States that it may bring
and that's
situation.
Yes, definitely, and that's something that we need to continue to focus in on, because it can get lost in the Iran war, what the US wants, what China wants, but they both need each other, especially in the race to AI, because we're seeing loads of businesses and companies adopt more strategic thinking around AI in comparison to building up a workforce. But now I just want to focus my attention now to the subject of Taiwan, which you mentioned, and it did come up because Xi did say that the most important issue to China is to China and the US is how Taiwan is, and in particular, he said that it could create a highly dangerous situation if mishandled. Is this a clear message from China, and what does the US need to do in order to honor that request when it comes to Taiwan and how the US deals with that particular country?
Again, it comes to the strategy of the United States, which they have taken back from 1979. At that time, the duet between the Soviet Union and China was very strong, and communism and anti-colonialism was making big advances. And for the United States, it was very important to separate China from the Soviet Union. But it come at the cost of recognizing one China, giving seat in the Security Council and overall in the UN, taken from Taiwan, Taipei, and given to Beijing, to China's People's Republic of China. So since that time, the United States has taken so-called strategic ambiguity strategy regarding Taiwan. What it means? They recognized one China, but at the same time, they provided military help to Taiwan. By the way, right now, Taipei approved 25 billion to acquire military equipment from the United States.
Yes.
And one of points in these negotiations, China is pressuring the United States because the US Congress should also approve that. Taiwan has approved it, but US Congress should approve that. They are pressuring Trump not to approve that, or diminish, to reduce the overall cost. And I think the United States is in a difficult situation again. Why? Because China is a rising power. US is not already a rising power. In economic terms, approximately each year, percentage of China's share in global economy rises by about 1%. And similarly, the share of the United States diminishes by 1%.
Gosh.
Yes, and which means that in a very short period of time, couple of years, China will overcome United States economically, and they are going to build up their military.
Of course, and which is what the US is very much afraid of happening. I'm so sorry I've had to cut you short, Mr. Mammadov. They're telling me that we've come to the end of our time. But it's so interesting in the points that you picked up, especially in relation to the China-US relations and China rising and the US seeing that their future is actually could be at stake, especially when it comes to technology and when it comes to Taiwan, the bigger questions over there. But yeah, we need to have more time to discuss it later on.
Yes.
But thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Right, now we turn over to what's going on in Afghanistan, and it says that climate change is making natural disasters more frequent, more damaging and harder to manage as humanitarian needs grow. Kabul is looking to strengthen cooperation with Uzbekistan on emergency aid and disaster response. Now our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
Afghanistan's Natural Disaster Management Authority says climate change is increasing the scale and impact of natural disasters across the country. To discuss humanitarian assistance, disaster management and stronger cooperation, the Natural Disaster Management Authority Director General Nuruddin Turabi met Aybek Osmanov, Uzbekistan's ambassador to Afghanistan. Turabi thanked Uzbekistan for its previous aid and said the two countries share close religious, cultural and geographical ties. He said climate change has made natural disasters in Afghanistan more frequent and more damaging, increasing humanitarian needs across the country. Afghanistan is already vulnerable to floods, droughts, landslides, earthquakes, and severe winters. These disasters damage homes, crops, roads, and water systems, and often hit poor and displaced communities hardest. Turabi said the authority is responsible for receiving and distributing aid to disaster-affected people across all 34 provinces. Ambassador Osmanov said Uzbekistan remains committed to supporting the Afghan people, especially during emergencies. He said his country is ready to continue humanitarian cooperation and provide assistance during disasters. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, AnewZ.
Iraq's new Prime Minister Ali al-Zadi has been sworn into office with only a partial cabinet after Parliament failed to agree on several key ministerial positions. Lawmakers approved 14 ministers but failed to reach an agreement on key positions, including the Interior and Defence ministries. The parliamentary session saw heated disputes after objections were raised over the nominee for Interior Minister. Basim Mohammed was appointed Oil Minister, while Fuad Hussein retained his post as Foreign Minister. It's now time for a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update of the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages, including more of the key stories throughout the day. Stay with me. Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on AnewZ, and if you're just joining me, I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's go through the morning headlines. Donald Trump has met with Xi Jinping for a final round of talks as the US president wraps up his state visit to Beijing. Ukraine is hit by a second day of large-scale Russian missiles and drone strikes. And clashes erupt as mining groups stage anti-government protests in Bolivia. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to the BBC in relation to Eurovision 2026. The finalists that were have been announced after the second semi-finals, which saw 18 countries take to the stage with some standout moments from Australian star Delta Goodrem and a few others. Now, in alphabetical order, I'm just going to let you know who the qualifiers are. So this is a spoiler alert. If you don't want to hear it, please look away, but I'm sure by now you already know. But the qualifiers this year to make it to the finals was Albania, Australia, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Czechia, Denmark, Malta, Romania, Ukraine, Norway. Now, the 5 countries that didn't make it were, unfortunately, Azerbaijan, Luxembourg, Armenia, Switzerland and Latvia were all eliminated and will have to wait for 2027 before they can compete again. We have more information about what took place in the second semi-finals with our reporter Katie Wilson, who was there live in Vienna for it, and she'll provide us with more information as to how everything went. Now let's go over to our next headline this morning, and that's on Al Jazeera's website, and that's in relation to Cuba. Cuba says it has absolutely no fuel and has been hit by blackouts, protests among bad power outages. So Cuba has now also said that it may entertain, or it will rather entertain, an offer from the US of $100 million in humanitarian aid, but it has been expressed by criticism over President Donald Trump's intentions at a time when the US oil blockade on the island has crippled public services. Now, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez said the island's communist-run government was willing to consider the offer, but said no strings should be attached. Now, last week, the US State Department had previously put forward this $100 million conditioned based on it agreeing to meaningful reforms. However, that's something that the Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez has denied, saying that it was a fable and made up. Now, the Trump administration then repeated its offer with a statement on Wednesday in regards to the $100 million in humanitarian aid. Now, the living conditions in Cuba have dramatically worsened after Trump in January threatened tariffs on any nation supplying the country with fuel. Now, top allies include Mexico and Venezuela, who've had to cut off oil shipments to Cuba, which has led to dire shortages of fuel and electricity in the country. But we'll keep you updated as to how things go and whether or not Cuba does decide to take that humanitarian aid and what strings may be attached to that, if any. Now let's go over to our main story making headlines throughout the day, and then we go to CNN website in regards to, we go to AnewZ website in regards to Trump and Xi Jinping meeting. Trump says he is losing patience with Iran amid Trump and Xi talks on Hormuz Middle East conflict. Now, the two have been scheduled to meet today and have met at the Chinese Communist Party's leadership compound in Beijing. Now, only a handful of American leaders have ever stepped into this highly guarded headquarters, about which little is publicly revealed. However, the last president to do so was Barack Obama. Now, US President Donald Trump's trip to China will conclude later on today, but before that, he hopes to finalize a few more things. A few more things are happening and taking place throughout the day. We have a report that sums up all the information in relation to that. Our correspondent in Washington has more of the details. Let's go to him, Ubay Shambada.
In what could be a major energy deal in the making, President Trump announced that China has agreed to buy American oil and natural gas. Trump said that Chinese vessels will soon head to the states of Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska to fill up on American energy products. China currently imports around 60% of its energy needs through the Strait of Hormuz in the Arabian Gulf. But that may soon change as President Trump seeks to close major energy deals with Beijing during his visit. U.S. energy production has increased significantly under President Trump, and the move to source U.S. energy exports to China may also put significant economic pressure on Iran, which currently is a major supplier of China's energy needs. While President Trump and Xi Jinping have publicly praised one another during this trip, reports indicate that behind closed doors, the issue of Taiwan, a self-governing island that China claims as its own, remains a sore point between the two nations. The U.S. supplies Taiwan with military support, selling billions of dollars worth of advanced military aid that could be used in case of a Chinese invasion of the island. President Trump has been mainly focusing on the economic benefits of the improved relations with China, telling reporters that President Xi has agreed to order 200 airplanes from American manufacturer Boeing. The company's CEO is among many industry leaders that has traveled with President Trump to Beijing. President Trump also said that he is encouraging China to purchase more American agricultural products, especially soybeans. American farmers could stand to gain significant financial windfalls if China becomes a major market for their goods. Mube Shabander, AnewZ, Washington.
Now to the Middle East, and US-mediated talks between Israel and Lebanon are set to continue in Washington as Israel also outlines its wider regional strategy and a new Gaza-bound flotilla leaves Turkey.
US-mediated talks between Israel and Lebanon are continuing in Washington, with both sides trying to move towards a halt in fighting after weeks of cross-border escalation. A US State Department official described Thursday's talks as productive and positive, with further discussions set to continue on Friday. Lebanon is seeking a ceasefire that Israel implements, while an Israeli government spokesperson said the talks are aimed at disarming Hezbollah and reaching a peace agreement. The Washington meetings mark the highest-level contact between Lebanon and Israel in decades, and come as a fragile ceasefire is due to expire on Sunday. Israel is also presenting its wider military operations across the region as part of a broader security strategy. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would keep acting against threats while seeking cooperation with what he called moderate actors in the Middle East.
The determination to strike those who seek our lives deep within their territory, far from our borders, the buffer zones we have created around us, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, all these have changed the face of the Middle East. We will continue to fight forcefully against every threat of radical Islam. At the same time, we will expand cooperation with moderate actors in our region who have understood the advantages of extending a hand to Israel.
Meanwhile, dozens of boats from the global Samud flotilla have departed from Marmaris in Turkey, carrying aid supplies and international activists. The flotilla is trying to reach Gaza by sea in a renewed challenge to Israel's blockade.
I would say that it's important for flotillas to continue because it holds hope, it brings a community together, and it gives visibility. It's like we might not reach, but every time something happens, like the interception, for example, it creates new awareness to new audiences.
The voyage follows an earlier attempt by the same group, which was intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters last month after setting off from Spain. More than 100 pro-Palestinian activists were taken to Crete, while 2 others were taken to Israel after being arrested.
Now, rescuers are searching for dozens of missing people after a Russian missile strike destroyed part of a residential building in Kyiv. Ukraine says the country faced one of the largest aerial attacks since the war began. Here's more on that story.
Search and rescue operations are continuing in Kyiv's Darnitsky district after a Russian strike caused part of a residential building to collapse. Ukrainian officials say at least 27 civilians were killed across the country over 2 days of attacks, while dozens remain missing in the capital. Ukraine says Russia launched more than 1,500 drones alongside dozens of missiles in what officials described as one of the war's largest aerial assaults. President Volodymyr Zelensky said preliminary investigations showed a recently manufactured Russian Kh-101 missile struck the Kyiv apartment block.
We are investigating in detail exactly which weapons, missiles and drones the Russians used this time. According to preliminary data, a Kh-101 missile struck a building in Kyiv. It was manufactured in the second quarter of this year, which means that Russia is continuing to import the components for missile production, the necessary resources and equipment in circumvention of global sanctions. This must be a real priority for all our partners, to stop Russia's schemes to circumvent sanctions.
Meanwhile, the United Nations says one of its humanitarian convoys came under drone attack while delivering aid in the southern city of Kherson.
As usual, we plan carefully our missions. We are very concerned about security given the constant conflict. We have notified the military, both the Ukrainian and the Russian side. But unfortunately, immediately after passing the bridge, entering Austria, a drone hit one of our cars. Luckily, nobody was hurt. We could go to the place where we were supposed to go, deliver the assistance, and then while we were doing that, a second drone attack, again, one of our cars.
The aid convoy later completed its mission before being evacuated by local authorities. No injuries among UN staff were reported.
Now, Canada could soon join the Eurovision Song Contest after Eurovision director said the country would be happy to welcome to apply. The director said Canada has not yet applied but could take part if its broadcaster, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, meets eligibility rules as an associate member of the European Broadcasting Union. The idea was first raised by Prime Minister Mark Carney in Canada's 2025 federal budget as part of plans to strengthen ties with Europe. Canada would join Australia as one of the few non-European countries allowed to compete after Australia was approved in 2015. Now over to sport, and the biggest sporting event is less than a month away, and Philadelphia has begun final preparations to host matches for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, which is taking place in the US, Canada and Mexico. Now in Philadelphia, the Lincoln Financial Field is being upgraded to meet international standards. The stadium is receiving a hybrid pitch of natural and synthetic turf, while branding is being removed and replaced with official tournament signage to comply with FIFA rules. The venue will come under temporary FIFA control during the preparation period, ensuring all requirements are met ahead of this tournament. City officials say the upgrades will help showcase Philadelphia as a key host city on the global stage. Now to Europe, and explosions in the streets of Bolivia's administration capital, La Paz, is in turmoil as the country is now facing a wave of unrest that has turned economic frustration into open confrontation. Here's more.
Violent unrest erupted in Bolivia's capital, La Paz, on Thursday as police clashed with mining groups demanding the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz. Demonstrators faced off with police in an attempt to force their way into Plaza Murillo, the political heart of the city, as sticks of dynamite were reportedly thrown during clashes with security forces. The protests come as Bolivia faces a worsening economic and fuel crisis, with miners, farmers and union-backed groups blaming shortages of fuel and US dollars for crippling livelihoods. Demonstrators are demanding easier access to diesel and explosives, alongside changes to mining contracts and regulations. In response, government officials have accused opposition figures and former President Evo Morales of fueling the unrest. Evo Morales, who is warning the unrest would continue unless rising prices, fuel shortages and inflation are addressed.
These leaders, who serve former President Evo Morales' political interests, agreed not to engage in dialogue and continue telling Bolivians that the only way out is to break democracy, to overthrow a president elected by popular vote, who was legitimately elected and has been in office for only 6 months. Whose interests do they serve? What financing is behind this? What is the alternative? To return to the same model they used for 245 months, and that failed.
The government says it remains willing to negotiate, with authorities already holding talks with protest leaders over fuel subsidies, welfare support and land reform legislation. Shortly before the clashes erupted, around 20 mining representatives entered the presidential palace for emergency discussions with ministers and the president himself. Still, some protesters openly called for the president to step down, warning that if he refused to resign voluntarily, they would force him out through mass unrest.
We do not want dialogue or anything. We only want the resignation of the president no matter what. He leaves the good way, or he leaves with social upheaval.
Bolivia is at a critical moment. The national spirit is wounded, the democratic heart is grieved, and the institutional soul is in deep anguish as a result of what we are experiencing.
Meanwhile, roadblocks set up by protesters have caused severe disruption nationwide. Thousands of lorries have reportedly been stranded on major highways, leading to shortages of food, medical supplies, and oxygen deliveries for hospitals. What began as peaceful demonstrations has now erupted into violent unrest, reflecting mounting anger over Bolivia's economic crisis.
Now, the United States and Cuba have held rare high-level talks in Havana amid worsening tensions and a deepening energy crisis on the island. CIA Director John Ratcliffe carried a message from President Donald Trump linking future cooperation to major changes by the Cuban government. Now let's go to the story.
CIA Director John Ratcliffe met senior Cuban officials in Havana on Thursday during a rare visit by a top U.S. intelligence chief to the island. According to a CIA official, Ratcliffe delivered a message from President Donald Trump saying Washington would seriously engage with Cuba on economic and security issues only if Havana makes fundamental changes. The Cuban government confirmed the talks and said both sides discussed possible cooperation between law enforcement agencies on regional and international security. Cuban officials also told the U.S. delegation that Cuba does not pose a threat to American national security. The meetings came as Cuba faces severe fuel shortages and rolling blackouts. On Wednesday, the United States offered $100 million in direct aid, while Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel said Havana was open to reviewing the proposal if it followed international humanitarian standards. Relations between the two countries have remained strained for decades, with Washington demanding political and economic reforms from Cuba, while Havana accuses the United States of worsening the island's crisis through sanctions and the long-running trade embargo.
Now let's head back to the region and in particular Azerbaijan, because Baku is preparing to host the 13th session of the World Urban Forum. Global attention is increasingly turning towards the future of housing, and it starts on Sunday and will bring together heads of government, urban planners, plus international organizations at a time when nearly 3 billion people worldwide face some form of housing insecurity. For Azerbaijan, hosting the WF13 represents not only a major international event, but also an opportunity to position Baku as a regional centre for urban diplomacy, post-conflict reconstruction, smart city development and sustainable infrastructure. To further dig into this and a lot that is going on over this weekend is Eldar Rasulov, Senior Manager for the Content and Media Relations at the World Urban Forum 13. Welcome to the programme this morning.
Hi Nadia, thanks for invitation.
It's a pleasure for me to be here.
No problem. Let's get straight to it because I know you're a very, very busy man. So what makes this year's forum in Baku particularly significant within the broader global debate of urban development? And what concrete outcomes do you think should we realistically expect from it?
Well, what makes the difference between the previous sessions of the World Urban Forum, the WUF 13 is the first World Urban Forum that's taking place in Caspian and South Caucasus region, and it's a big, I think it's a big impulse for regional countries and for Azerbaijan to showcase their potential, showcase their experience in, in sustainable urban development. For example, for Azerbaijan, it's an amazing chance to showcase the experience of building and implementing smart villages, smart cities, and also to obtain knowledge from regional countries and for worldwide countries. Maybe they have some solutions that could be adapted in Azerbaijani urbanization planning. Also, WUF 13 will have a new feature that's uniquely represented at WUF 13. For example, a ministerial meeting on the progress made on the new urban agenda, or the business and innovation hub. And at the top of my head, for example, a WUF Academy and urban cinema. These are some features that's going to be represented uniquely at WUF 13. And the theme of the forum itself, well, before digging deeper into that, I would love to offer some statistics to you. Experts claim that by 2050, more than 2/3 of the world population is going to be living in urban areas. And the challenges and the problems that could arise from that, that's why we need World Urban Forum and its sessions, the biggest platform to discuss these issues. And so the main theme of the WUF 13, housing the world safe and resilient cities and communities, that's the alignment with this. This is the most actual agenda now when we are talking about urbanization.
I see. Wow. So they're looking ahead because you're forecasting that a high number of the population will be moving to urban cities, and how do we, how does governments, how do countries actually manage that? In that sense then, to what extent is global housing crisis now reshaping international politics itself, because it's becoming more and more an agenda on a number of governments' lists in relation to housing and just housing in general?
For sure. It's going to be, well, if you're talking about the future of the cities, who are the citizens of future of the city? It's all of us. It considers the government representatives, NGOs, academic institutions. So we're all stakeholders when we're talking about the future of the cities. That's why at WUF 13, the official start of the WUF 13 marks the ministerial meeting on the new urban agenda, where the government representatives all over the world will come together to discuss the key points and adjustments to be made till 2036. So we have this 10-year window when we still have time to make things right. So that's going to be the main agenda, where not only government representatives, not only mayors of the cities. I mean, only at Urban Expo, for example, there will it will take around 35,000 square meters of area. And it will be represented by various institutions, various private sector representatives, businesses, non-governmental organizations. They will all come together to discuss these solutions. And by the way, WUF 13 is promised to be the record-breaking in terms of solutions and pavilions. So we'll see how it will change the global agenda on urbanization.
Yes, we will, because we know it's a 6-day event full of great minds coming together, really tackling a serious issue. Now, I just wanted to bring up that Azerbaijan has declared that 2026 the year of urban planning and architecture. Now, while simultaneously hosting WUF as well, one of the world's most important urban forums, how strategically important then is that for Azerbaijan's international image, and could it help position the country as a regional hub for architecture, infrastructure and urban development?
We really hope so, and we really, I think, aim to, because our urbanization agenda hasn't started to change only with WUF 13, because even for last 2-3 years we've been conducting national urban forums on the liberated areas. So that's where it started, and before that, if you look around the city, if you ask any citizen like how Baku changed in 10-year timeline, there are lots of things. When we're talking about green vehicles, lines, scooter lines, micromobility, and issues like that, the city is changing its look. And we've been sending this message to the regional countries that we are doing these changes, and by hosting an event like this, it's the second large-scale event of Gyane after COP, which we already hosted.
Did, yes.
Which we did. So yeah, we're pretty ambitious. We're pretty ambitious about that. I think that's one of the main points, to bring together all of the stakeholders. Now, whenever you're talking about urbanization and sustainable urban development, whatever comes to your mind, being it green agenda or urbanization itself or the green materials, so we are sending message to the region and to the world that Azerbaijan is a place where these new memos are going to take place, new investments are gonna happen.
Yes.
So we are sending the message to come here to Baku to do it.
To be the birthplace, you could say, of that. Now, one of the most closely watched dimensions of WUF 13 will also be the reconstruction and redevelopment process of Karabakh and the East Zangezur. To what extent could Azerbaijan attempt to present then these territories as a model for post-conflict urban recovery, smart cities and sustainable resettlement? And the reason why we pinpoint that is that the world, as much as it's a great place, there's a lot of conflict going on. And it's now a really good time for Azerbaijan to show how urban development could actually look after post-conflict.
It's a great question. So I would like to talk about some experience of ours before WUF 13. We conducted WUF 13 festivals to raise awareness in Azerbaijan about WUF 13. And we had these exhibitions in festival, we call it Roadshow, WUF 13 Roadshow. It was conducted in 9 major cities in Azerbaijan, and there it drew close to more than 100,000 participants. And we had exhibitions at these festivals, we called it before after. So it's in the liberated areas, how it was just even 5-6 years ago, and how it is now. So we are showcasing the reconstruction process that we've made so far in a short period of time, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna showcase this potential and showcase this journey of ours at WUF 13. Even only the Azerbaijani pavilion in Urban Expo is more 1,500 square meters, and I'm pretty sure one of the bullet points that we wanna show the regional countries is how we rebuild, how we are still rebuilding that territories, and how smartly we are trying to do that. We have already implemented smart villages, smart cities.
Yes.
So that's going to be, and it's not only it's like learning and it's showing. It's like teaching and learning at the same time. We're going to showcase our experience, and probably there will be so many smart people all around the world.
That can contribute.
It could be architects, it could be NGO representatives, it could be some scientists, and they could give us some good ideas. We could observe something that we missed before.
Yes, definitely.
And we could adapt their experiences to rebuild it even better.
And very quickly, the final question. I've only got a minute, so you only have a minute to answer this question. When historians look back at this particular period, do you believe that defining the challenge of our era will ultimately be military conflict between states, or the struggle to build cities capable of sustaining growing populations under conditions of climate stress, technical disruption, and geopolitical fragmentation?
There are so many dialogues and assemblies during WUF 13, and most of them will be aligned with the main theme that we were talking about, housing the world. So whatever happens in the region, whatever happens in the world, the fact is the population is growing. The population is growing, and by now, more than 1 billion people are living in inadequate living situations. And there are more than 300 million people that are homeless or live in slums. So at this point, it's not even about conflict. It's about growing population and resources. So what we need to do is to get together at this point, as we did about the climate during COP.
Yeah.
So now that's another issue that concerns all of us. Despite the region, despite the geography, despite everything, that is something that's gonna concern all of us. That's why Azerbaijan is ready to host the biggest platform to offer this kind of solutions, and we hope that it's going to be a turning point till 2050.
Yes, well, I'm sure it will be. It kicks off on Sunday, the 17th of May, and continues over 6 days. So we will definitely be covering everything going on at WUF 13.
We're going to be waiting for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rusalov. Thank you. Right, thank you so much for watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Gyane. Those are your top stories for the day, but please make sure you stay with us throughout the day as we get more information in regards to these key stories. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I'll be back on your screens on Monday for further news as to what is taking place across the globe and in the region. Take care.